Hello and welcome to another episode of Nutanix Weekly, one of the many podcasts coming out of XenTegra. This one being Nutanix focused, and I'm your host, Phil Sellers. I am the practice director for Modern Data Center here at XenTegra, and really happy that you're spending a little bit of time listening along. Can't do this alone, so I brought my merry group of co-hosts. I don't even know where to go with that one. So introducing our co-host for today. First up, Chris Calhoun, who is a solutions architect here at XenTegra, former Nutanix sales engineer, former customer of Nutanix, and former teacher. Uh, Chris has had a few different lives. It seems like. Chris, how you doing?
Fantastic, as always. Thanks for asking.
I mentioned that teacher thing because honestly, I think it still colors how you interact with our customers today. You love teaching, you love sharing information, which is fantastic to have you here on the podcast sharing information every week.
Yep, definitely exciting. Appreciate it, buddy.
Coach too, did I get that right? You were a
Yes,
coach at one time?
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, so coach teacher makes a really great solutions architect. So I like that. We're also joined with Andy Greene. Andy, also former Nutanix, former Cohesity employee. Andy, you've been here, what, a little over 6 months now?
We are rapidly approaching 9 months.
Wow. And honestly, don't take it as an offense, but it feels like you've been here a lot longer. You're a rock star, and I definitely enjoy having you on the team. We were on a call earlier today, and Andy just absolutely rocked it out with one of our customers, and just can't believe it's only been 9 months, honestly. So.
It is my pleasure. Honestly, I'm loving the team dynamic here at XenTegra. It's been a great fit for me.
And wrapping up the co-host quadrants, we've got Jirah Cox. Jirah is probably someone no one needs an introduction to. If you listen to this, you know Jirah, but he is the man, one of Nutanix's field CTO architects, and just all around nice guy. Jirah, it's great to have you on the podcast too.
Thank you, Philip. Just once, when a podcast host says, "Here, meet my bunch of married co-hosts," I want them to be co-hosts all named Mary. Today's not that day.
Well, that seems like a long-term sort of commitment.
Gotta have goals.
It's either going to be a really hard recruiting thing, or it's going to take 30 years or so for us to farm that out.
One day, the stars will all align for all of our co-hosts.
Well, on that note, Mary, we'll get started with a blog post today. More news coming out of Nutanix, and nobody's slowing down over there. And it's pretty evident because the number of releases and announcements posted on Nutanix.com/blog just continue to happen. And so we had a tough time kind of talking pre-recording, figuring out what we wanted to talk about today. So we settled on this. Here at XenTegra, we love Nutanix Unified Storage. We think it's one of the greatest parts of the portfolio. And so we've got news on Nutanix Unified Storage. So, Jirah, do you want to unwrap the news real quick and tell us what you've announced?
A bunch of stuff. This is actually a very exciting article with a whole slew of improvements for NUS here. The first one, right at the top, is the introduction of Nutanix files running in the Azure environment, right? So there was some preview going on here. Now it's here for real. And so now there's an ability to run Nutanix files, not just on your on-prem clusters, not just in clusters that are in the colo data center or at the edge, but now also running in cloud on or without Nutanix cloud clusters, right? Or NC2 substrate. So this could be the very first thing you ever deploy is Nutanix files running in Azure there, without any HCI footprint whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting news. So the name of the blog post today that we're talking about is Cloud Ready, Azure Steady. The next release of Nutanix Unified Storage is here. It's version 5.2. Blog was written by Yuval Dada and Alex Alameda. Thanks for posting this so that we have something interesting to talk about. Yeah, I mean, this is another kick forward for Nutanix Unified Storage. You know, we've talked about in the past what this looks like inside of AWS. So now it's coming to Azure. And let's recap for anyone listening real quick, Jirah. What does this mean that you don't need that Nutanix footprint? How is this actually running?
Yeah, so actually, Philip, you and I have had some shared customers in the past where the customers have wanted to add cloud to their Nutanix-shaped hybrid multi-cloud. They've wanted to maybe use public cloud as a DR target. And one of the biggest components of their environment that was for EUC specifically was their profile storage, right? And so that requirement to say, sure, you can run files anywhere, asterisk, anywhere you can run Nutanix, became kind of a long pole in the tent of their design of like most of their cluster in the cloud running Nutanix was there just to run files and receive profile replication, right? Since it was an EUC environment, they had a small gold image template and a linked pool of desktops. They didn't need a lot of storage for VMs themselves. So with this kind of an optionality now that customers have, files, which is our software-defined, high-performance, scale-out, unstructured data storage, right? So if I think file shares, think application data shares, think home directories, think team drives, right? Everything you would do through a standard file server hosted by Nutanix can now run on a Nutanix cluster. Maybe a great way to run it on-prem, can run it on a cluster in the cloud, or can run in the cloud without a cluster as well. So for like this customer, where the vast majority of their replication target would have been just files, well, now I can run just files on the cloud itself directly, running our Nutanix file server VMs as native cloud VMs, and then using native cloud storage, both block and object, to be the actual capacity tier of that file server. And then since I'm running Nutanix files on both ends, I get that native application simplified management outcome so that my data, right, my user directories are there when I want to actually need them, right, like for like a DR failover.
Yeah, 100%. We've talked to a number of customers about Nutanix cloud clusters or NC2 running inside of Azure, and it's not always the best fit. Chris, what kind of happens to customers when they start looking at NC2, and why does this NUS running directly on cloud give them a benefit?
I'll tell you this from my experience in the past. I've had customers and peers of mine from Nutanix trying to work on a solution for customers that wanted that agility and flexibility to run in the cloud. But to Jirah's point, if the large majority of the data from on-prem that gets replicated to the cloud is file server storage, then that footprint is your longest pole, biggest hurdle, whatever you want to call it. And that's something that's sometimes hard to overcome from just hardware. With some of the specific requirements around NC2 in Azure, you don't necessarily have the flexibility to have 15, 20 different hardware models, all with expansive storage. So it became pretty expensive whenever typically a 4 to 6 node cluster on-prem would be 8, 10, 12, 14 to get the amount of storage that you need. So that was a challenge from the past. And I think that, again, this goes to Nutanix's willingness to listen and even try to make the difficult technical things simpler. And that's where I think that we are now with the flexibility of a native offering for the underpinning, that really helps and eliminates that hardware requirement and avoids that compromise of having to overdo or create a larger footprint than is really truly needed.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me too is, for the use case Jirah was talking about with user data, things like that, we also need to protect that. We need DR. We need some way of making sure that that data is in a good spot. And so, when you invest in a files platform, whether that's Nutanix files or whether that's Azure files or even Azure NetApp files, you need the data portability tools. You need those features. And so, Andy, um, you know, what about smart DR here? With this implementation, are you going to be able to do um, the unified storage sort of move around data, that kind of thing within the cluster or within files implementation?
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where we're just gaining additional flexibility in how and where we run those shares. So Nutanix has that smart DR feature. It's basically a disaster recovery feature that's built into Nutanix files, and it gives us that ability to replicate that share level data between the different file server instances that are running on the various Nutanix clusters that we might be managing. Typically, for DR purposes, we're doing this across geographically distinct sites. And I think the key benefit here is it just gives us that ability to have a read-only copy out at those remote sites, but also very fast recovery times. We can quickly fail over from one site to another in the event of an emergency.
Yeah, and increasingly our customers are choosing, all sorts of different platforms. We have customers that are still Citrix customers, but maybe they're dabbling in AVD. Maybe they're looking at Omnissa, running with AVD, and then they've got some things on prem. But at the end of the day, they all have user profile data, and so with that, Chris, I'm kind of curious. I mean, is this a solution that we can pair with those orchestrated AVDs, whether it's Nerdio or Citrix or Omnissa? Does this pair well with that?
Absolutely. And I really think that this gives customers the chance and the opportunity to test out a proven solution that's resilient. One of the biggest things about files is that single namespace and the flexibility of running multiple file server VMs, that underlying foundation of Nutanix files. In the past, customers have had that Windows file share server and single instance, and that would be the gem of the most critical of, surprisingly, a single back-ended system. And that's one of the things that, with the flexibility of a hybrid model, yes, great. We'd love for you to continue to work with Citrix and AVD for those EUC workloads, but let's back-end it with a portable, flexible Nutanix file solution that provides a fantastic, resilient target for those profiles. I think that's going to be something that really lends itself to tools, capabilities, and yet portable flexibility.
Yeah. So Jirah, as Scott's questions, how does this work? Like, what's going on under the covers?
So under the covers, right, we actually are building virtual machines on your behalf that are running the same OS, same application stack, right, that our FSVMs, file server VMs run on-prem. It's still a scalable cluster, right? So start with a minimum of usually 3 of those VMs, but then I can either attach more storage to those VMs to have them run as a logically larger NAS, or I can also scale out those VMs as well to then get even more throughput, drive more IO on the same data set, or I can grow in both directions, right, if I choose to. Whether I choose to scale out or scale up, what's neat here is that the system is going to automatically do intelligent data placement and know, like we learned first 16 years ago, what's hot data, what's cold data, right? What should I do about it? And so that ability to blend data across both Azure Block Storage, read more expensive, or across Azure Blob Storage, more inexpensive. We can put the data where it can be the most effective to you as the user, but be the most economical on the monthly bill.
I like the way you put that. You blended two things that I wanted to talk about, because as soon as I saw does it scale, my mind immediately went to the does it blend videos on YouTube, right? And so then you start talking about this blending it all together. So it does both, right? You get the blend and you get the scale.
Yeah. And when most people hear about scaling in cloud, they're like, well, sure, of course it can scale. What does that do for my monthly bill, right? And so scaling, but also being a good custodian of both your data and your dollars. Whoa, that was awesome. Gonna write that down and reuse that later. Is just, it's just part of the job.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? We're really looking at this in terms of cost control as much as we're looking at it from a performance standpoint. We don't want it to tip over. Obviously, we want it to be performant if we're using it next to highly intensive workload like FS Logics or profile containerization. So, there's all sorts of other use cases too. So we're talking specifically around VDI, but we work with a ton of healthcare customers. And so, PACS systems have a lot of data. And so scaling those out, moving those and refactoring those, you really need a powerful scale out architecture that you can count on. And so, it's great that you have both options, right? You can go to the fastest tier, but you can also make it a little more cost conservative by tiering things off to blob storage.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is another drive towards something we've talked about in the past. I think it's called Project Beacon, right? That's the refactoring of your services on the Nutanix platform today to run independent of the Nutanix platform. So this is another example of that coming to fruition, right?
I think it's that, as well as combined with sort of as we help customers design and build their own hybrid multi-cloud, it's understanding that change and migration is going to be a persistent element of that, right? Like we can get it as most right as possible as we can today, but tomorrow business is going to need different things out of it. So how do we help that stay flexible, stay agile, right, and skate to where the puck is going, kind of thing?
Yeah. Andy, I remember we got a email, and I think we were both on it for one of your customers, and they were asking us a little bit about, how do we tell when this Windows file server's at capacity, and what tools do we have, and how can we do any sort of performance testing and stuff like that with it? It's not easy to do on Windows, is it? And what's the benefit here, I guess, for customers when they're looking at Nutanix files?
Yeah, well, Nutanix files has always been just incredibly scalable from a performance perspective. Jirah touched on that earlier. And we're also extending that unified namespace across many different Nutanix platforms. One of the updates that I've seen as part of this project is that now we'll also have the ability to extend that unified namespace across some non-Nutanix systems as well.
Mm.
So it gives us that seamless way to bring external file shares into that single namespace, and it also gives us some flexibility around phased migration approaches.
Yeah, and see, that's all a benefit to the customer, reducing risk, that risk of something hitting a bottleneck, and giving you an alternate path to move. I love that. When we talk with customers, a lot of this concern about risk, migration, those kinds of things come up, Chris. With something like Nutanix files, I've got to think this may be the last time you have to do a migration.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the biggest things I remember from my days, of course, as a customer is um, those EOL periods where you had to swap out hardware, repave over everything, migrate data, all the like. Well, with Nutanix, obviously, as you bring in both either on-prem infrastructure and then even age that out, it's a matter of just, of course, adding an additional node. And in this case, if you can flex to the cloud for portability and have that capability, your data is pretty much not localized to one data center, but flexible enough for you to access it from anywhere. And I think that that's really streamlining the business of the future as far as making your data portable and not locking it into that one server under somebody's desk or that one piece of shiny hardware in the data center that runs absolutely everything. It's being agile enough to have resilient systems that are flexible and that will allow your data to flow from both
Yeah.
file shares on-prem to the cloud and vice versa. So I think that that's really where Nutanix flexibility lends itself and is the glue for both hybrid on-prem and cloud-based environments.
Yeah, I know the last time I did a large scale sort of files, multi-terabyte, I want to say nearly 100 terabyte files migration. It took several weeks, and that was doing, I don't know, 10 lanes of robocopies on different directories in tandem. And, we had all these sort of scripted ways to get around, throughput or bottlenecks to try and make it happen. And it still took weeks or months to make those transitions happen. Being able to do it in a way that preserves user access throughout that transition, the external or the logical namespace, I think those are huge benefits that are now delivered. I know I talked to a customer recently where external namespaces came up as a way of unifying pools of storage within their Nutanix clusters where they didn't have enough total storage, but by tapping into A, B, and C, now they have enough total storage. And so there's some huge benefits there, I think, for captive storage capacity. The last thing I would say, Jirah, you and I did a podcast talking about AI and ML workloads. So we've talked about user profiles, we've talked about PACS data, imaging data. There's a whole nother workload that we haven't talked about, AI and ML, that uses unstructured data. And we had a fairly big announcement. Nutanix Unified Storage performs like a rock star when you're running underneath those kinds of workloads. So do we get that here too?
Yeah, believe it or not, it almost is it's a funny way to think about it, right? We were top of the heap, very proud of our results, right, for the ML Perf benchmark, several blog posts and several episodes of the podcast ago. But I guess that wasn't good enough for us, right? So not wanting to sit still on that. With the enhancements now that come with Files 5.2, powered by SR IOV over the Nutanix platform, we can now offer storage also over NFS over RDMA, which has dramatic reductions in latency access, allows us to do memory-to-memory data transfers between storage and GPU clients for GPU direct workloads, right? We can now feed those. I saw them most referred to as AI accelerators. They're GPUs. That's what they are. They're GPUs. We can now feed those GPUs just vast amounts of data even more quickly, right? So like streamlining that high-speed data path between the GPUs that want to do the inference and do the analytics and the platform that hosts the data, us, hello, that lets you do all of that AI work that you want to do even much more rapidly, right? Which, when you're buying these assets, the faster you can do it, A, better for the business, but B, I can get onto my next job task, right? So then I can do even more work for me and lower that effective cost for each AI token, if you will.
Yeah. Well, and so what I'm hearing you say is basically it's like Pac-Man for GPUs. You're just basically letting the GPU eat faster. So
Right. So yeah, that is a fair way to put it. Files 5.2. It is that big dot that makes all the ghosts blink, and then you can go even more. That's a very apt analogy.
Well, this has been a long time coming. Nutanix Files is a mature platform. The version number 5.2 lets you represent that it is absolutely growing up. One of the new things also in this release, metro clusters, so the ability to do synchronous. And so this was something we weren't able to do. It comes into place a lot of times when we're doing, sort of split workloads, VDI on both sites, active. So this is a really great additional feature too.
Yeah.
That real-time mirroring across geographic boundaries is also huge. Typically, we've had to include a third-party software to be able to achieve this.
Yeah.
That's great that this is now coming. Do you know if there are any restrictions, requirements around being able to do Metro with files?
The biggest one is laws of physics.
Yeah.
Still apply. So, must have two data centers that are close enough to each other to do it, right? That's usually the biggest one I see among my customers that I consult with. But it's cool, right? It's IT. Traditionally, we've just simply bought two of everything, right? And put them some distance apart and then done some amount of work, maybe zero, maybe more work to be able to do failovers across those two environments, right? Given what we can do with modern software, modern hardware, right? This metro deployment of like, look, I'm still going to buy two of these things, but I effectively want to do as little work as possible to do a failover, right? If something goes bump, if a truck hits the wrong pole at 3 a.m, can everything just fail over? Yeah, a couple of minutes while VMs boot back up, but can everything just fail over and no humans get out of bed? Nobody gets on a VPN on the laptop, just make it all work. And we've had that now for VMs for a while now on Metro AHV, but it's so great to see files come to that party now too, right? Because now my systems that rely on those file shares get that auto recovery outcome, right? My desktops get that auto recovery outcome that they were using it for in the first place. So wildly exciting, glad to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to wrap things up there. I think 5.2 is an exciting release. It's something we rely on with our customers here at XenTegra. If you're not using files, did you know that you've got actual entitlement to it? Every single cluster of Nutanix comes with a terabyte of files entitlement, maybe two. I get it confused. You get entitlement for both files and objects. If you've never tested it out, it's a really compelling thing you can add to your cluster. For all our DRAS customers, we recommend that they adopt this because it gives superior DR capabilities when it comes to unstructured data. And so with that, I'm going to say thanks to Chris, Andy, and Jirah. Appreciate you guys meeting with me, talking about it. And thanks everybody who's listening. We will see you on the next podcast. Have a great day.